Hey, welcome guys! In this video, we're gonna create a window, create a renderer, write the main game loop, and hopefully we're gonna have some graphics being displayed on the screen. This is gonna be a very fun one, so let's get started. And like I said, we're gonna start by creating the window. Alright, I have 4Coder opened up here, and this is how we left things last time. And quickly, I'm gonna change this from checking for not equals to 0 to checking for equals to 0. And that's just gonna make sure that we continue execution from this if instead of the else. So let's copy this printf to here, and we can actually get rid of the successful one. And instead of using printf, I'm gonna use a call called SDL log. And SDL log is very similar to printf. It works the same way. It takes in formatted inputs. So if you have something like this here for an integer, you can have variables here like this. Basically exactly the way printf works. The only thing is you actually get some cool functions with this, like SDL log error and SDL log different stuff, but I usually not use them. I just use SDL log, and the cool thing is SDL log also works on mobile devices. If you use printf on a mobile device, and let's say you're using Xcode or Android Studio, you actually might not get the printf to show up in the log window. But SDL log always works, so that's why I like using SDL log. Okay, so we're gonna say if SDL init is 0, or we can also say if SDL init, if not SDL init. So if it's 0, it's gonna say not, and that's gonna be true, and we're gonna get in here. And here we're gonna create the window. So that's gonna be a call to SDL create window, and we can quickly take a look at the wiki here. Let's do a search for create window. And here it is, SDL create window. And I don't know if you noticed, but it says SDL2 SDL create window. So SDL2 is the second version, I guess, of the SDL library. There was also SDL1 at some point, and now it's legacy, basically. We don't use it. SDL2 is the latest one. But actually, I think it was last month or 2 months ago, they started to develop SDL3, which is kind of bad timing for me, actually making SDL2 tutorials now, because SDL3 is going to come out. But yeah, if you actually do a couple searches here, we can get to SDL3 create window. So just so you know, there's going to be a new version, but I suspect most things will stay similar. Like, as you can see, the create window calls, like all 3 of them here, are the same. It's the same name, so this stuff will most likely be the same. So okay, that was a little tangent. Let's get back to the topic, which is creating a window. Okay, as you can see, here we have the call. It returns an SDL window pointer. We want to create a variable to store this, and we're actually going to copy this over. And in here, it actually gives us detailed explanation of all the parameters of the function and the return value, which is, we're going to check soon. Okay, if I can actually copy this. Like I said, let's create a variable for SDL window. Let's create a global one, actually, because we want to access this from all kinds of different places. And let's call this global window. And because it's declared outside of any function, it's going to be set to 0 by default. So we don't need to do something like this or this. Great, so let's get the window and let's set the return value of SDL create window to that. And let's take a look at the parameters. The first one is the title, which is completely up to us. Let's call it Pong. This is going to be the title at the top of the window, like here it says 4Coder project Pong. That's the title basically. The next 2 are the X and Y positions. So let's actually format this like that. So the X and Y positions are going to be flags, and we basically have 2 choices. We can either set it to be centered or undefined. What I usually like to do is set it to centered. So here we can take a look at the parameters. X, as you can see, we can set it to centered. I'm going to copy that, paste it here. And I'm going to do the same for the Y position. This is just going to make sure that when the window is created, it's centered on the screen. The next two will be the width and the height of the window. We also want to keep track of these. So let's also create two global variables up here. These are going to be integers, I guess, because it's defined as integers here. So let's also follow that. Let's set them to be integers in screen width and in screen height. But actually, we might just want to set these as pound defines instead of variables, because we don't want these to change, essentially. We don't want the screen width or the screen height to change during the execution of our game. So let's just make these defines. And for the size, let's think a little. I mean, we can use any resolution. It's completely up to us. So for a Pong game, it doesn't really matter that much. Let's just set it to be 1280 by 720, which is a good resolution. I think it's 16 by 9, which is usually a good resolution to aim for. Basically, just multiples of 16 by 9 is a good rule of thumb. Okay, let's use these. So let's copy them. Screen width, screen height, and the final one is going to be the flags, and I'm actually going to create a separate variable for this called window flags, and this is going to be an unsigned integer, and we're going to set it to a couple of flags actually. So let's take a look at the wiki again, and here under remarks, SDL is kind enough to tell us all about all the flags. These are probably not even all of them. There's probably more, but I might be wrong. So the only two we need are SDL window shown, which is actually ignored. So we don't really even need it, but let's just put it there just for fun. And then we're going to use this SDL window resizable, which is also not that necessary because we don't really want to resize the window, but I'm just going to set it because maybe we can play around with the window size if we want to change it. Okay, great. So in theory, this should create the window. Let's also do a check. So we can do a check by saying if global window. So if global window is true, that means we successfully created a window, and we can say else, and we can put an error message here saying error failed to create window. Okay, so the reason we can do this is because SDL create window will return null if it fails. And you can see that here under the return value. It says returns the window that was created or null on failure. So we can check for null to see if it worked or not. And it also says call SDL get error for more information. And that's a good idea. SDL get error is a useful function that we can use to get more meaningful error messages. Because if you just say error failed to create window, we don't know why it failed to create a window. And SDL can actually provide us with a more meaningful message. So this guy, it just returns a string and doesn't take in anything. So we can just copy this. And we can basically do this. And now we're going to print SDL get errors message after our own. And we can even say SDL get error like this. Let's do this for both of these guys actually. Great, and if this works, we don't need to print anything because we're going to see the window. Okay, let's compile this. All right, it says SDL screen height. What did I do? Oh, I misspelled screen height. Height. If I'm not horrible at English, I think that's how we spell it. Let's see, okay, it compiled. Let's go to remedy and let's set a breakpoint and let's go through this. Okay, it worked. I don't even have to check for this because I saw the window. It's there. It's here. Guys, we did it. We created a window. Well, SDL did most of the work, so good job, SDL. But if you try to click on it though, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. And that's because we're not polling for events yet. And that's going to be the topic of the next lecture. But long story short, if you don't poll for events, you're not going to be able to do any kind of user input. You can't even close the window. So it's basically a frozen window. But yeah, we're going to fix that in the next lecture, don't worry. So let's let this finish. And let's go back to our code. So, okay, we have the window. Now we want to create a renderer. And the renderer is going to handle all of the rendering for us. It's going to draw stuff on the screen. And we're just going to use the simple API SDL provides us. Like, draw this, switch to this color, draw this. Now present what you drew, and stuff like that. It's going to be a very similar process. We're going to need to create a global variable for an SDL renderer pointer, which we're going to call global renderer. And then we want to make a similar call, which is SDL create renderer. So let's take a look at that call real quick. Let's create renderer. It's the one here. Okay, as you can see, this even takes less parameters. We can just copy this. So global renderer. And the first parameter is the window, which we have. The second one is the index, which we can just set to -1. And the last one is the flags again, and we're going to call this renderer flags. And the renderer flags is going to be an unsigned integer. And we're going to set it to, let's see. So quick note, the index is, it has to do with the rendering driver to initialize, right? It says it right here. The index of the rendering driver to initialize. You can just say -1 and not care. And it's just gonna do it automatically, basically. Initialize the first one, it's sports. So for the flags, let's take a look at this guy here. So there's only 4 flags, and the only 2 we need are SDL renderer accelerated and SDL renderer present vsync. So present vsync locks the frame rate to the refresh rate of the monitor you use, which can be 60 or 144 or whatever your monitor uses. And most games actually use this. If you don't want it, you don't need to use it. I'm gonna use it. So let's take this guy, paste it here. And the second one we want is SDL renderer accelerated, which is going to let us use the GPU. Use hardware acceleration, which is going to make our rendering much faster. Okay. So this should create the renderer. We can do a similar check. We can say if global renderer, and we can say else, and we can print an error message here, failed to create renderer, and we can print SDL get error again. Great. I like to bundle, pile up these error cases at the bottom here so that I can have the true flow of the program up here and I don't have any error messages in between. That's just how I like to do it. Okay, great. Let's check if this works. So let's make a log here. Created renderer. Let's compile. Let's get into remedy, let's run, and okay, created a window, and okay, it created the renderer. Amazing. So now we have a window and we have a renderer. That means we can start drawing stuff. So first things first, let's clear the screen to a color. Right now, the screen is just, as you can see, it's just white. And we don't want that. We want the screen to be a color. So let's go back. Let's close this down. And the call to change the color of the renderer is, if I remember it correctly, SDL set render draw color. Let's quickly check, because it's always difficult to remember these names. It's set renderer set render draw color. What did I call it? Set render draw. Okay, I was right. That's cool. So it takes in the renderer and takes in a color basically, an RGBA value. So let's copy this, and we're gonna pass in the renderer, and then we're gonna pass in a color. And this color is represented by 4 different values. Each value is an unsigned 8-bit integer, which is basically a char or char. It goes from 0 to 255. So let's see, let's clear the screen to a red so that we can clearly see that it's working. So that's going to be 255 for red, 0 for green and blue. And for alpha, we're also going to set 255. Okay, this just changes the color of the renderer. It doesn't render anything yet. So for that, we need to do a different call. And that one is called SDL render clear. It has clear in it, I know that much. Let's take a look. SDL clear. Render clear, yes. So this is a call you'll rarely use. You just basically put it inside the loop once and you forget about it, basically. Okay, so let's take this guy. Let's pass the renderer. And this is going to clear the screen. But even this still doesn't show any graphics to the screen. For that, we need to do a final call, which is called SDL render present. And that also takes the renderer. And I can also show that to you here. It's called present, render present here. Update the screen with any rendering performed since previous call. Okay, so believe it or not, this should actually change the color of the screen, even though we still don't have a game loop yet. So we're still not going to be able to let the game run. We still need to use breakpoints. But hopefully, did I compile? Let's see. We'll see now. Yes, I did. Okay, present. And as you can see here, the window is red. We still can't move the window, which is a bit annoying. But yes, we have some color on the screen, finally something fun that we can see. It only took 2-3 episodes. Okay, let's close this down and let's actually create the single most important thing for our game, which is the main game loop. Which is, guess what? It's gonna be a while loop. So this loop is gonna be the whole game. It's gonna keep running, keep looping until the user quits. So it's essentially all of our game here. So that's why it's called the game loop. And because it needs to run continuously, we can just set it to be while true or while 1. But we're actually gonna be a little bit smarter than that, and we're gonna create a variable. And that variable is gonna be a Boolean. So let's create a bool up here. It's gonna be a global one. Let's call this global running. And global running is going to control the game loop. So let's set it to true before we enter the loop. And let's just check for while global running, do the game. And in here, let's move this render clear and render present. We don't want to set the color over and over again, so that's going to stay outside. But we can clear the screen here. And what this is going to allow us to do, actually, let's compile. Now we don't need to use the breakpoints anymore, because the game is just going to keep running until global running is set to false. As you can see, it keeps running. We still can't do anything. We're also not setting global running to false anywhere. So this is just going to keep running, and we need to close this from the debugger, actually. Okay, so this is all I wanted to do in this lecture, but finally, as a final cool thing, let's actually use a call called SDL getTicks, and this returns the amount of milliseconds since SDL is initialized. So this call here. We can take a look at the wiki for this. It's called getTicks. There's also a 64-bit version, which is better to use, but we're just going to use this one. And it's get the number of milliseconds since SDL library initialization. It returns the uint32. And let's actually take a look at the return value. We can do an SDL log. And we can log this guy. And I'm gonna move this inside the loop so that we get the updated version each time. Let's compile. And as you can see, it's printing the amount of milliseconds that has passed. And if we actually divide this by 1,000, it gives us the seconds. And now we can use this to change the color of the screen. I'm gonna do a very simple thing. I'm not gonna really think too much about this because I don't want to take too much time like creating an effect. Let's actually leave that there. Let's copy the color setting in here so that we can set the color to a different value each frame. By the way, each iteration of this loop is called a frame. So that's what you hear in games like, oh, 60 frames per second, this many frames per second. So every time this loop runs, it's essentially one frame. So now in each frame, we want to set the color to a different value. Let's set the green color to SDL get ticks. And let's actually do modulo 255 so that we don't get a result above 255 because that's not gonna work. And let's compile this and try running. And as you can see, ooh, maybe I should put like a flashing disclaimer. We get this cool flashing effect going from red to orange, I guess. I don't know how colors work that well. But yeah, okay, cool. This is it for this lecture, guys. Thank you for watching. This was a fun one. We finally have some graphics on the screen. In the next video, we should be getting up and running with player input and events like I told you. We're gonna be finally able to close the window. That's gonna be fun. Make sure to watch the next one. Make sure to subscribe, guys, and have a nice day.